On today's video, we're going to talk about how to make lush chords that are well defined and have good harmonies and very big and bold. So let's use the orchestra to get going, and we've got a scaler, and the scaler is going to send some chord ideas to the orchestra at first, and then we're going to add Divisimate's VSL orchestra setup at the end just to really fill it out. So first consideration we have to think about is what chord are we going to start with, and we can start with a basic three-note chord like a D major. So that's going to play the orchestra completes full sustain patch, but I have everything muted but the first violin. So this is the very first idea of a chord sounding with a very basic violin string. And all three notes are going to be hitting that violin, and then we can unmute the second violin, and that will add. And that's just adding an instrument. It's not adding any notes to the chord. And then we can add violin. So we're getting a bigger range of sound as the instruments are unmuted. But you'll notice they're still playing the same three notes in that register. So we're not getting any very high notes from the violins, and we're not getting any very low double bass notes. But it's simply stacking up all these instruments, which are giving us a wider sound, okay? So now the next thing after adding instruments, we want to add notes to our chord. So that would be the next thing to consider. So we're just starting with the D major, and if I select it here and then hold down Shift and then click it, automatically takes me to where I can edit every note of my chord. And I can invert it up and down, and I'm thinking for it to be the start of our main chord, to add notes to it up and down, let's move it more to the middle. So let's make this three-note chord move up the keyboard one octave. So now it's up at C3, and we'll play it. And now we have more room on both sides to add some notes. But then the thought is, okay, what notes do you add to make it sound good? If you stick to the three notes of the chord, in this case a D, an F sharp, and an A, and they're all in beige color here on the keyboard, you'll be pretty safe. Or you can have some of Scalar's tools help you. In this case, if I invert it up with this button, it will take one of those notes and move it up in the higher register. And it took the D and it moved it up. But now I still only have three notes, so that didn't really help me out. But I know where the D used to be, and I can just click it, and now it's a four-note chord. Now let's listen to that. And now we're getting there. We're getting more of a full sound. Well, if we can do invert it up, we can invert it down. So let's invert it down. And it's taken the D now and moved it down, but let's restore where the old D was. And now let's listen. So we're getting there. We're getting some of the low notes of the orchestra. These instruments, the cello and the double bass, are starting to kick in more. But we could use some higher notes up here. So we know we have our original D, F sharp, and A. It would be pretty safe to say that we can use one of those notes and move up the scale a little bit. We could try an F sharp up here, which is pretty high. And that might be too high. How about an A? We could go an A here, and that sounds about right as far as where these notes should be. One other thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to have too many low notes together. You wouldn't want to have something like this in your lower register, because the low notes of the register will stack up and really cloud up your progression. And it's just the way frequencies work in the lower range. So let's get rid of those. And just remember that you can have some notes in the lower ranges here, but you don't want to stack them up close together. It'll get too muddy. In the higher notes, it's easier. The frequencies can handle notes closer together. You could have some notes close together, but we're doing pretty good. We added the A. We have a pretty good sounding chord made up of 6 notes, but I think we could add one more, and I'm thinking an A here. And because the A is one of the original notes, it should sound good. Now we're getting a nice all-around full chord sound there. If we wanted to go super high or super low, we could even add more, but we don't want to go overboard. But for the sake of demonstration, let's try the F sharp up here, and let's go down another D and listen. And that's sounding okay if that's what you're after, the super high, super low, and a nice mid-range. And we're going for a big lush chord, so for now, maybe we could stick with that, but I'm going to just say for now, let's turn those off, and sometime it delays there, okay. So now we're still back to a 7-note full chord, but kind of more in the mid-register, and it's giving us a nice sound. That's a very nice, safe, big, lush chord. But we're only really begun because there's more things to consider. So one neat thing you can do in Scalar is you can develop one beautiful lush chord the way you like it, just like we did here, and you can do it completely, customize it the way you like it, and then you can go back to the main here, and you can say you can again use this chord as the basis for suggestions for a bunch of chords to go with that. So the D major, we're going to suggest tonal, or we could go in the scale. And now these suggested chords aren't going to be 3-note chords, they're going to be huge big chords just like this D major. So really you just need to make one specialized custom big chord, and when you use the suggest button for it, you'll see all these chords are really nice. See the A? That's huge. And that's a big time saver because we've really only handcrafted one big chord, and now we get all these examples to go with it, which are also in that same big lush chord flavor. And we could go and just use the tonal to get some really interesting ideas. All right, so we've set up our chord. We like the fullness of it. We have all these examples that we can test with it. Now, next, we're going to turn on Divisimate, which will, instead of stacking MIDI notes, which is good and gives us a nice full wall of string sound in this case, there are times when you need your chord to not only be big and full and lush, but you need it to be well defined with beautiful harmonies, and that's what Divisimate can do for us, and that we'll try out next. So here we've got Divisimate set up on a preset for a big tutti sound, which has lots of instruments of the orchestra turned on and activated and harmonized here, moving it up and down in register. And we've taken the default used to be a 4-note patch, and we've added 7 notes. We've activated more notes. Even though they're not hooked up to specific instruments, it will still allow for a much larger sound because it will use 7 notes of the chord. So let's go back to where we were. We've turned off the mute off of this big folder here, which houses all the instruments that Divisimate is playing with that preset. So it's playing mainly VSL instruments. I tried to put in here all the instruments of a basic orchestra, just like recommended from the Divisi website, which they also give you a default template that it tells you what instruments go where on what channel. So really the default kind of layout of an orchestra, I've turned it on, and it's going to play that big Divisi preset. But this time we're going to compare it against the orchestra, which stacks MIDI notes, and that of Divisi, which divides notes to each section or each instrument of the orchestra in a more realistic way, and the difference that makes. We're going to make a comparison. But first, let's listen to that same chord with just Divisi now. And you can hear every instrument separately. It's got that defined sound where you can hear the woodwinds in the high end, you can hear the lower strings, you can hear the horns, it's a big sound, but it's well defined. Now, if we add to that this full kind of rich wall of string here, which are really, in essence, MIDI notes kind of stacked on each other, let's see what that brings to the picture. Now, what happens if you keep all those instruments playing here and turn off the Divisi system, but it's still, this chord is going to play all these instruments like normally if you had a keyboard and you activated all these instruments, all of the MIDI notes would stack up. So here, to hear the direct difference, so let's turn the orchestra off. That's completely off. And now we're going to hear Divisimate. I'm going to turn it on its bypass mode. So it's bypassing the system that divides these notes and harmonizes them in a nice way. That's bypassed. And we're listening to it as though I would play this big chord just on a MIDI keyboard where all the notes get stacked in kind of a mushy way. So let's just hear the difference, and hopefully I can play it so you can hear the difference. I'll go back and switch it again. So you can hear how loud and bold it is, but it's like you're hearing really one wall of sound. Now I go back, Divisimate, and unbypass it. Hear the difference. It's as if all the instruments were now more defined and you can hear them again. It's not just a wall of one big sound, even though it was loud and grand. Now you can hear the instruments again when Divisi's turned on. It's really quite amazing. Let's do it again. So this is with Divisi. You can hear the woodwinds, you can hear the horns, you can hear the strings. And as quickly as I can, just go and bypass it. It's just a huge difference. And you still get a loud orchestra, but it's like it's just one loud sound. And then Divisi on, again, divides everything up, and you can hear the orchestra again. Now, of course, we'd need a chord progression that sounds good, but you can hear the instruments again. And that's the difference between just stacking MIDI notes and dividing them properly. So I really wanted to show that. I did that a while back, months ago. I made a little demonstration, but I think now was a good time to show that again, the difference between stacking MIDI notes and dividing them properly as an orchestra would do. So, but we can get the best of both worlds if we like that fullness and glue of this orchestra sound. We can simply turn that back on and we can have them both working together. So that's some ideas to help you with creating lush chords, how it works from just a basic triad, building each note up, layering different instruments to give you better sound, but also then dividing those instruments with the help of Divisimate, or if you don't have Divisimate, just being aware of when if you're gonna play a bunch of orchestral instruments or any instrument, and you're just gonna play it with a MIDI controller, and every instrument's going to get all 7 notes of every chord you play, it's literally going to just give you a wall of sound, which can be big and bold. But if you divide them properly and with care and harmonize them with care, you're going to be able to get that wall of sound, but it will have definition and it will have beautiful harmonies. So that's today's video. Hope you had a chance to make some music in the world wherever you're at. And we'll see you on the next one.